Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Good Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Right, okay, midweek episode of the show. Bit unusual, but Sunday I wasn't quite up to doing an episode of the show as it was the second annual beer festival that took place here, and I don't need to go into details about that, do I? Apart from it was a good evening, I can tell you that. If you're obviously on the Facebook and what have you, you'll have seen the post about which was the beer of the night, which happened to be In the Dark We Live, which by Scotch brewer, I forget which one it is now, but it was a very, very nice stout, and if you're into your stout, definitely worth looking up. But anyway, we're not talking about beer today, we're talking whiskey as per usual, and this is obviously part two of the Carn Mor tastings that I started the other week with the Strictly Limited range, and this week we're going to move on to the celebration of the Cask, which is their single cask bottlings. And I'd just like to say a big thank you to the company for getting me some information, some history about the company. Apparently it was formed in 2007 by two well-known families within the whisky industry. Brian Morrison, who's obviously of Morrison and Bowmore, who owned Bowmore and Auchentoshan and Glengarry before it was sold off, and his son Jamie Morrison run the company along with Kenny Mackay, obviously Mackay family, White Mackay, etc., etc., and his son Peter. So loads and loads of history within the whisky industry, and apparently their first bottling was a legendary 1965 Macallan. I mean, not a bad way to start your independent bottling company, it has to be said, with something like that. So yeah, basically not much more to add to what I said in the last episode about the fact that they did the celebration of the cask and the little bottlings, and then brought out the Strictly Limited range, and here we have it. So this is going to be this afternoon's little tasting. So let me introduce the lineup. Right, okay, so we're going to kick off with a Bladnoch. Bladnoch for donkeys, it has to be said. This is a 23-year-old. It was distilled in January of 1990, bottled in February of 2013, bottled at 57%, and it is from a bourbon cask number 3008. Now, talking Bladnoch, I read fairly recently that some Australian, I think it is, that's finally bought the distillery and plans to bring it back online and all that kind of stuff, and something stuck in my throat, it has to be said. The marketing bods have already got into gear about how he's going to revive this distillery and what have you. I'm thinking, revive it? It's already there. Raymond did all the bloody reviving. He did all the hard work putting the new stills in and all the work that was put into it. All this guy's going to come in, swan in, and start distilling again. It's hardly bloody reviving, but anyway. On the flip side, really nice to know that Bladnoch will come back online fairly shortly. I've seen mock-ups of the new bottlings they're going to, or bottle shape they're going to use, and it's very much moving away from the traditional style to a more modern style, so could be interesting. As we know, Bladnoch's got a fair amount of stock, so it's not like he's going to be stuck for stuff to bottle, so it'd be nice to see Bladnoch back on the shelves in due course, I imagine. Anyway, I digress. Bottling number 2 is probably as rare as rocking horse doo-doo. This is a 41-year-old Garnheath grain whisky, distilled in 1974, bottled February thereof, bottled in May of 2015, bottled at 50.8% from a bourbon cask 313235. Now, you think Port Ellen is pretty bloody rare. I've only ever tasted 2 bottlings, and this is the second one, from the Garnheath distillery. I must admit I haven't looked into the history of the Garnheath story, but I think it disappeared in the 80s along when a number of others disappeared, and I've only ever come across it twice, and unfortunately my limited amount that I managed to get hold of is long since gone, so apologies for that one if you like the sound of it when I'm tasting it, but that's kind of life, as they say. Third bottling I'll be moving on to, probably a bit of a strange order. I'm doing an old Caol, and you'd have thought peaty won't end, but obviously, as you probably know, peated malts, when they get to a certain, good ripe old age, the peat is very soft, and I thought I'd leave the sherry ones to the end anyway. So this is a 27-year-old Caol, distilled in December of 1988, bottled in August of this year, at 52.4% from a Bourbon Hogshead 4213, and I have a bottle of that in stock, so that tells you how good it is. And moving on to the three sherried offerings, we have a 25-year-old Linkwood, again distilled in 1988, May thereof, bottled in June of 2014 at 50.7% from Sherry Hoggy 2322, so could be interesting. The second sherry bottling is an Arran from a Sherry Puncheon, which is quite an unusual cask to use. You don't see them used that often. They tend to be obviously larger than a sherry butt, so this could be interesting. It's an Arran, it's 15 years old, bottled at 52.6%, distilled in November of 1996 and bottled in March of this year. And the final one we'll be looking at is what they call their black gold. I don't know why that one wasn't in the black gold, but these are all generally, the black gold are first fill Oloroso sherry casks, and this is obviously no exception. This is a Bunnahabhain, 20 years old, distilled in January 95, bottled in May of this year at 51.1%. So that's this afternoon's little lineup. So I think we'll kick off with the Bladnoch then, shall we? Right, okay, so a lot popular misconception has that lowlands don't age and Bladnoch doesn't age, but as a number of us well know, that's not entirely true. They just become sort of wonderfully straw-like and interesting with age. So let's see if this one is up to the task then, shall we? Straw-like, yep, definitely. A little bit of coffee, a little bit of barley. It's got a very mature, almost starting to become slightly spirity edge to it, but not quite. It's kind of hanging on in there. A little bit of herbalness, white fruit, wonderful freshness. I mean, obviously the alcohol's obviously helping the give it a fresh aroma to it, but that's what I love about old Bladnoch. It just seems to retain the freshness, and it's all sort of maturing out really nicely. You don't get an awful lot of kind of dusty oak, and this certainly doesn't have it. It's not like how old Spays tend to go. It's like I said, this Bladnoch tends to develop this very straw-like character, which is absolutely gorgeous. Bit of earth, a lot of earth now in actual fact. It's becoming really, really earthy. I'm getting a little bit of oak now, a little bit of butteriness. Not a lot, but just a little bit. It's really very, very complex. Palate? You can feel the alcohol on the finish. Ooh. 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 Just getting breath back. 57%. That sure kicks some. Yeah. Anyway. So again, we've got the moist, dank, slightly sort of earthy straw-like notes. A lot of barley, some coffee, a touch of toffee, some lovely spice. Some alcohol, obviously, Probably could do with a touch of water, but as I haven't really got enough left in there to warrant doing that, I'm not going to bother. Because trouble is with a lot of these older malts, especially Bladnoch, I found it doesn't seem to do water particularly well, so I'm going to kind of refrain from that. But like I said, lots of malt. It's actually quite weighty and robust for sort of for Bladnoch. Although I have tasted some fairly sort of robust Bladnochs in the past, so it's not unusual. Yeah, that's really good, like that. Right, actually I've changed my mind. I think I will put a little drop of water with it, and it's just by magic the water jug appears. So let's see what a little drop of water does to this then, shall we? Alright, see what the nose does now. That's got really juicy, lots of orange, almost marmalade-y kind of notes. More barley, still quite herbal, still quite straw-like, but oh, that's got aromatic, that's lovely. Palate's a little bit watery, still some malt, some coffee, not as much citrus as the nose was kind of implying that they might be. Straw, little bit of bittering tannin now on the finish, but also a little bit of bitter chocolate as well, which is quite pleasant. So so yeah, it's not quite fallen apart like I thought it might, but it's certainly probably best at its natural cask strength. So so yeah, yep, still damn good. And moving on to the Garnheath, let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Pungent, oily, licorice, really intense dried fruit, sultana, a little bit of raisin, a bit of coconut, dried citrus, quite sweet. The coconut is really coming out now, which is obviously from the oak. A little bit of vanilla pod, some spice, but oh, that's lovely. Really very, very good grain. I mean, and it does smell mature, it has to be said. It's got that kind of slightly old note, but I mean the thing with grain is, I mean, it'll just keep going and going. And a little bit of smoke now, really complex, really, this is absolutely gorgeous. Palate. Oh, the honey on that, it just glides. Beautiful finish. Some gentle, soft, slightly sweet spice, slightly bitter spice. Oh, lovely balance. Again, lots of the dried fruits, but it's got a real slightly peppery vibrancy to it. A little bit of coffee, chocolate, cocoa, coconut. Again, almost kind of cognac-y kind of dried fruits. Oh, that is just absolutely sublime. I mean, I can still taste the spices now. It's just got such a lovely vibrancy, and yes, it's got some maturity, but oh, it's still got some life to it at 41. I mean, that's impressive. And here's a little inside bit of gossip, but apparently there are still some casks of this that they have got, so there will be some more of this bottled in due course, I would imagine. I don't know when, but there'd be no hurry to bottle it, I can tell you that. It's certainly got if the other casks are anywhere near as good as that, the only obviously sort of defining part will be obviously how much alcohol they lose. And well, I mean, this was 50.8 after 40 odd years, so I reckon it's probably got at least another. I would have thought they could bottle us at 50 quite comfortably. And and for its price, I mean, I forget how much I was retailing it for now, but it just was just an absolute steal, a real bargain. And no, sorry, I won't keep going on about it because yes, you can't buy it anymore. Anyway, enough of that. Let's go on to the next one, shall we? I love old Caol Ila, and let's see if this is a good one then, shall we? Oh yes, that is indeedy. That's got some depth to it. Some dusty herbal peat. Just that classic old Caol Ila character. A little bit of medicinal herbs, some iodine. Not a huge amount of salt or coastal notes. Bit of honey, bit of malt, some barley. Oh, that's just a big, robust Caol Ila. It's not sort of thin and sort of on its last legs. This is absolutely fantastic. Touch of coffee. Oh, it's just wonderful. It's almost kind of getting up to the level of old Port Ellens, that they tend to have this similar kind of dusty maturity to it. But this is absolutely gorgeous. A little bit of tea leaf coming through now. Some herbs, some barley. God, it's just one of these whiskies that you could just carry on smelling all night. But you want to know what it tastes like, so I better taste it then. Quite a salty finish in actual fact, which is surprising because I didn't get that on the nose. Dry, dusty, earthy, quite full again, lots and lots of barley. It's not as oily. I mean, this is obviously old style Caol Ila rather than the slightly more modern, heavily oiled version that we have today. Crisper, but still lots of weighty barley, medicinal notes. Gentle, dusty peat, which is just lingering and lingering. Lovely maturity, it has to be said. I mean, that is an absolute fabulous bottling of Caol Ila, and good, very, very good. Okay, let's move on to the Linkwood. So this has been aged in a sherry hogshead, so obviously originally was a bourbon hogshead, and then obviously was seasoned with sherry. So I'm not expecting a huge amount of sherry character. I'm expecting sort of a nice balance between the sherry notes and the sort of vanillins. So let's see if we're right then. Yep, it is very subtly sherried. Well, not very subtle, but relatively subtly sherried. Bit of dried fruits and barley. Again, Linkwood tends to have, or can have, a fairly robust sort of characteristic, even when aged in American oak. Wonderfully honeyed, luscious, God, beautifully mature, it has to be said. Again, I'm not getting a lot of dusty, mature oak. I'm getting sort of more sort of tight herbal sherry, a little bit of licorice and treacle, high toned, slightly green citrus fruits, almost gooseberry. And the barley is just, absolutely wonderful. It is really, really impressive, and I don't say that about many sherried whiskies, it has to be said. But like, this has balance. It's not just monstrous sherry. It has spirit character. There's more wood notes. It's just superbly balanced. Absolutely gorgeous. a little bit more heavier on the sherry on the palate, a bit more milk chocolate, raisins, almost kind of like that PX toffee herbal kind of character, treacle, dark honey, very mouth-filling, very soft, very chewy, malty, but there's some nice spice at the end, that sort of slightly not quite bittering, but sort of intense. Obviously the alcohol is kind of like, even though it's relatively light at 50.7, it says relatively, it's just giving it that sort of piquancy and that cleaning element sort of on the finish. Wonderfully long. Doesn't feel 25, it has to be said, but it has some of that lovely mature element to it, and the dried fruits are lingering, and the spices, and that's just damn good. That's all I can say. Damn good. And moving on to the Arran. Okay, so 15-year-old Arran. Let's see what this gives us. Relatively coastal, actually. Very herbal. A lot more sherry. There's some toffee. A little bit of soft coffee. Again, a little bit of green citrus coming through. Some lime. Plenty of malt. Nice fullness to it. Some dusty oak notes coming through. Yeah, I mean, it's not a big sherry monster. I mean, it's a puncheon after all, which is a larger cask than the than a butt. And I'm guessing this is, it might be first fill, but I don't think it actually is. But again, the sherry character is very subtle. It's very full, and there's still some of that almost lightly tropical Arran character coming through, but it's more kind of in the citrus sort of end of the spectrum, shall we say. But it's absolutely very, very nice, it has to be said. Palate. Oh, that's wonderfully mature. It does feel a little bit older than 15, it has to be said. It's got that lovely softness. Again, probably a little bit more sherry on the palate, a little bit more sort of raisins, prune, a little bit of almond, some lovely intense spice, a bit of salt, very malty, very, very deep. Not quite so much of the distillery character coming through. I'm not getting so much of the sort of the tropical fruit character. I'm getting more of the malt, so I'm still getting some spirit character. So the balance, I think, is still really very, very good. A little bittering on the finish, but it's kind of interwoven with those spices, and certainly doesn't seem to be too out of shape. And the malt just keeps going and going and going. I mean, that's really very, very good. Yeah, nice. And finally, on to the big sherry Buna. Let's see what the nose gives us then, shall we? Smells a lot older than it actually is. I mean, it's only, what is it, 20 years old, but a lot of sherry, lots of coffee, licorice, quite mellow, lots of dried fruit, little bit of sort of, you know, that oxidation character coming in, a little bit of dried fruit, a bit of citrus, a bit of, again, sort of, you know, some green fruit notes. intense, very herbal. I mean, we know Bunnahabhain uses an awful lot of sherry casks, and it's kind of, I'm not getting a lot of distillery character, but as far as sherry cask whiskies go, this has got some lovely depth to it, and it's got complexity from the cask. And it's warming, it's not one-dimensional. Yes, you can argue it is a tad on the sherry monster kind of scale, should we say, but it's just lovely. This is lovely winter dram, probably just about the right time for it now as the nights are closing in. Mouth-filling, dark honey, treacle, licorice, dark toffee. I think you get the picture. Dried fruits, little bit of bitter chocolate on the finish, but it's so well integrated, so well balanced. Again, pretty malty, big, juicy, ripe, full. Little bit of smoke, and certainly a bit of salt on the finish, although that is kind of wrapped up in the alcohol, so the dryness is as much alcohol as it is kind of saltiness, but still plenty of treacle to offset that. Lovely balance, gentle spice, lingering dried fruits. I mean, again, not a huge amount of distillery character, it has to be said, but yeah, a fantastic sherry cask whiskey nevertheless, I think. So definitely definitely worth the 3 figures, I should say. Right, okay, so let's sum this little tasting up. Firstly, big thank you to Morrison and Mackay for the samples, for the 2 tastings that we've done, and just being, just phoning up and saying, look, I'm coming down, I've got more samples, and I'm going, yeah, brilliant, and it's just nice that sort of, these companies like them, and Douglas Lang, Hunter Lang, and Bartles Whisky, etc., are just more than happy to send samples. If you order, great. If you don't, you don't. It's they know at some stage that you probably will, and it's just really nice that they've have the confidence to sort of send out the samples. And anyway, this afternoon's tasting. So the Bladnoch, yeah, I love the Bladnoch. Classic old-fashioned Bladnoch. Can't say any more than that. The Garnheath, absolutely fantastic. Again, great old whiskey. Sorry, it's kind of all gone, but these things happen. I don't think there was very many bottles of it produced. I think I got about 3, 4 maybe. I think, but you just have to keep an eye on the website for these kind of things. Bottling of the day probably has to be the Caol. I mean, I'm just a bit of a sucker for old Caol at the end of the day. It was one of the first whiskies I really got into, and it just blows me away about how well Caol actually ages, and how close it is in style to sort of old Port Ellen. And if you can't have Port Ellen, just have an old Caol instead. So of the sherried ones, well, yeah, the Linkwood was nice. I mean, you find a lot of Linkwood in various shades of sherry colour, shall we say. I've had some big monstrous Linkwoods and some American oak age ones, but I think that just had some really nice balance to it. You certainly get the sherry character, but you also get some vanillins and that kind of thing. The Arran does seem to work quite nicely with sherry, it has to be said. And this one was quite a malty affair, probably not quite as kind of tropical, but some age to it, and really nice. And finally the Bunnahabhain. Yeah, sherry Bunnahabhain. If you like sherry Bunnahabhain, you'll love it. I think the quality was definitely there. It was definitely worth the 3 figures that it retails for. Yeah, okay, not a huge amount of distillery character, but like I keep saying, the thing with older sherry cask whiskies is you get the complexity from the cask and the oxidation and all that kind of stuff, and it kind of makes up, I suppose, to a certain extent, for the fact that there's no distillery character whatsoever, but just a lovely sherry cask at the end of the day. So, and you don't hear me saying that very often. So, anyway, that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll tune into the next one, because I've got quite a special tasting lined up for the next episode of the show, and well, I'm not going to give it away, but you'll just have to come back next week and watch it. So anyway, good dramming and good afternoon.